This is a talk by myself and Shaili Desai. Desai is a student who's working with me, and as it typically happens, the student does the work and I get the credit. So I'll start there with social media. One of the things that has happened is that the way newspapers and the mainstream media itself operates has changed significantly. So things which were, for instance, in the past in features pages in newspapers, that kind of thing has moved increasingly to Instagram. Entertainment, likewise, has had certain elements moving over to YouTube and certain elements moving over to other forms of social media. And politics in particular, even though Twitter or X is a much smaller platform than, say, WhatsApp or YouTube, the fact that all the journalists out there are on Twitter makes it a really important starting point for where journalistic conversation takes place. So, sense of where we are here in India. This is 2022 data, somewhat old. However, as you can see, WhatsApp is still a very important place where a lot of conversations happen. But second to WhatsApp is YouTube. And while I will talk a lot about Twitter, we will revert to YouTube and how that is changing the media and specifically the news environment. So there's the most followed YouTube channels are now Indian. Anyone here has heard of Choo Choo TV? A few of you, right? So you can't have children and not have heard of Choo Choo TV. That's for starters. And there's a bunch of there's two kinds of major movements in YouTube-related content in India. One is aggregator content. So something like T-Series or Set India has a very large amount of content which it is using in other platforms and now just mirroring that on YouTube. Whereas there are smaller content producers, including people who are in the news business, which we will come to, who make a smaller amount of content, but that content gets much higher long-term engagement. Here is a short survey on young urban India's news consumption. Again, this is 2022 data, and this is largely urban Indians sampled. And what you're seeing here is that print is much smaller than online media in terms of how people actually access their news. And this is a pattern which has been increasing year by year, and going by what the rest of the world is seeing, it's a trend that we expect to continue seeing in the direction of social media. All right. I put this there just for fun, actually. The share of Instagram users in India. Does anybody know what's unusual about this graph? Instagram is much more male in India than in most other markets. So in most other markets, there's either an even split or more female users on Instagram, whereas in India, it's more male-driven. And that, in turn, also has impacts on what kind of content ends up going viral on Instagram. So, a little bit about, theoretically, why influencers are important in the communication space. The first thing that influencers do is they help to set the agenda on what are the conversations that a politician or a political party will have, and the influencers themselves can help frame that. So if you choose a certain influencer, if you choose Lata Mangeshkar, there is a certain set of values that come with Lata Mangeshkar, and that becomes representative of who your party stands for. Influencers, by that extension, also give certain amount of credibility. It's the same as how you would think about brands and influencers within brands. Influencers help amplify content. The fact that an influencer is willing to put their name against your content means it's more likely to go out to a larger population. Influencers can help polarize content, especially the influencer a priori is already somebody who's a polarizing figure. It just means that it will move further in the direction of where the influencer stands. Influencers can be useful in micro-targeting, and this is one of the things that Facebook has been very effective at doing, is figuring out who an influencer reaches out to. You could say, well, what is the value of, let's say, Deepika Padukone versus MS Dhoni in terms of the value they bring to a certain product, which you can track much more effectively now based on, let's say, how much likes the same product gets from Deepika Padukone versus MS Dhoni. And that kind of micro-targeting is much more enabled on social media than any other media in the past. And last, especially when an influencer crosses into the path where they are part of the disinformation network, an influencer can actually amplify certain kinds of disinformation online. So for these reasons, influencers have historically been important in communication, but more so in political communication, and we'll see why this is so. So there's an influencer pyramid on social media, and specifically I'm going to talk a little bit about influencers on Twitter. These triangles you see here are evidence that I'm not very good at PowerPoint. I was trying to make triangles within each other, so I failed at that, and now I just have these next to each other. But the point is that there are the first level of influencers, which are big ticket politicians or people who have a very important space outside of being on social media alone, okay? So those influencers have a certain different kind of online behavior than, say, the next level of influencers who are still big ticket influencers, say things like television anchors or movie stars, maybe not of the top shelf movie stars, A-listers as you might call them. Then the next level of influencers are people like lower level politicians and IT cell heads. And the last is an influencer who maybe has something like 20 to 50,000 followers on, say, a platform like Twitter. And each of these has a very different kind of impact that they have online, as well as a different kind of propensity to engage certain kinds of content. So you will not see a really top-level influencer say something very risky, because that might end up both impacting the stability of that account. Somebody might get canceled for whatever reason, but also that influencer has to act within the framing of that person's brand. You can't just say whatever. In some cases nowadays, increasingly, you see people saying whatever, but in general, they're more careful about managing their brand. It is at the third and the fourth level where you see the most aggressive kind of social media activity in terms of engaging hate speech, in terms of innuendo, and things like that. And it is very important when you're talking about social media polarization that we don't get swept up only in talking about mis and disinformation, because perhaps the most important element of social media polarization we see today is that of innuendo. So you suggest something which is not legally disinformation, but the fact that you suggest something puts an idea in someone's mind, and that in turn has second order effects, okay? So that kind of activity happens more on the lower levels than at the higher levels of engagement. So you have traditional influencers, right? So cricket stars, major journalists, movie stars, etc. And then there are these new influencers who are people that you might never have heard about before social media, but now come to be people of significant importance. It is also important that influencers on social media typically engage in multi-platform outreach. Most major influencers, even if they have a small presence on, say, Instagram and a major presence on Twitter or Facebook, they'll still have some amount of presence on the other platform as a placeholder, okay? And this also has to do with the way certain social media platforms rise and wane over time. Also, your influencers have moved beyond the traditional notion of an influencer, which might be a young person who appeals to certain kind of brands of products, to one of the major spaces that influence has grown is in farming. And there's a number of farmer channels which will talk about how to grow certain crops, etc. There are people who do dance and stuff, but there's also senior people who do dance. There's cooking channels, etc. So this goes back to the point I was making earlier about features and how features themselves have changed because of influencer. But as a result of these influencers becoming important, they start also having political importance, and that's where I'm going to move with the rest of this talk. All right, so let's go briefly into the origins of celebrity political influencing on social media. How many people are familiar with this set of images? So this goes back to 2008, and this is very important for a range of reasons, because you can look at these images and interpret them in a range of ways, okay? So you have over here a man of peace, right? They're the white birds floating about. You have a man of technology, and not just an old rickety ThinkPad. This is an Apple laptop in 2008, a big deal. This is a man of learning and erudition. If you notice, there is a copy of a financial newspaper and Barack Obama's autobiography open. This is a man of skill. It's a man with an SLR camera, very closely focused near a bird. And most importantly, this is a middle-aged Indian man, category that I'm in, who exercises, which is not typical for us. So what you see is there's multiple layers through which the way that a picture gets taken matters to the way that a brand gets built over time, all right? And what Narendra Modi's original campaign was, and this goes back to 2008, slow down. This goes out back to 2008, but over time, this kind of campaigning where you use very careful imagery has become central to the way not only Narendra Modi works with this, but other party members and other parties have adopted social media behavior. So, if you remember, when Google first came out with the Google Hangout product, Narendra Modi's team used it with Ajay Devgan and a bunch of citizens asking him various questions. It was one of the early uses of celebrity influencing, and Ajay Devgan had just made Singham, which at this point is Singham Part 7 or something, but this was the original one. And so it was a clever use of the timing of when a certain celebrity is important and how you incorporate them into your campaigning. During the 2013 campaign up towards the 2014 elections, Narendra Modi met with a bunch of celebrities, and perhaps the one that went most viral at that point was his meeting with Rajnikant. Rajnikant did not say, vote for Narendra Modi. And that's very, very important. When you say vote for Narendra Modi, that becomes crude. But when you just go and stand next to the guy and say, standing with Rajnikant, that has a very important kind of visual appeal, and it says more than if the person was actually asking you to be explicitly partisan. Okay? What Modi was also very effective in doing during his first campaign, well, after the first campaign, was in Swachh Bharat, where he started doing these celebrity calls to action. So now you see over here, this is Modi saying, I am pleased to invite the following to join the Clean India campaign. Sachin, Ramdev, and Shashi Tharoor, etc. And there's again stuff going on over here. Shashi Tharoor is an opposition politician, and here I am saying, hey, come join my campaign. And Shashi Tharoor, in his classic style over here, says, some gobbledygook about being in Bucharest, but once he comes back, he's going to start cleaning the streets or something like that. And next to that, you also see Hrithik Roshan also responding to something. And here, what you're looking at is, if people remember the ice bucket challenge, right? So where you put cold water on yourself to help ALS. Those kinds of things go very quickly viral. So what the campaign does over here is call on a certain set of celebrities and then have them call on a certain set of celebrities, and so on and so forth. So here you have Hrithik Roshan cleaning the streets in Juhu with his arm in a cast. So his hand is fractured and still he's working so hard to clean the streets. So as you can see, there's very clever use of imagery alongside how you can engage a celebrity without saying, you are part of my party. So that distinction is important in how you cultivate celebrities. Okay, there's also a very clever use of expertise. This is also in the early phase before a cricket tournament. Narendra Modi says, good luck Umesh Yadav, bowl the batsman with your impressive speed and reverse swing. This is not some Andu Pandu statement who doesn't know cricket. This is reverse swing. I mean, he's obviously, watched or it appears that he's watched Umesh Yadav. And then another similar one about Akshar Patel. And the catch, of course, being is that if Modi calls on you, your career might be over very soon, as happened with these two individuals. There's also a use of religious celebrities, which is again something which is very, very carefully and cleverly done. And over time, you can see that the engagement with ashrams and people who are associated with religious outfits has become much stronger on one side of the political spectrum over the other. And that has to do with the way that has been cultivated over time. So these are some of the ways in which celebrities, all of which you're seeing here, are people who have celebrity life outside of what they're doing on social media. Okay? Now, over time, the same playbook has been used by Rahul Gandhi and other parties. And Rahul Gandhi now will go and hang out with somebody who's eating pani puri on the road or something, and a travel influencer. He will show that he knows how to use a spanner on a motorbike. So there is this nature of influencing as having moved not just from engaging other influencers, but to the politician themselves becoming an influencer. In the same way that when you think about Narendra Modi's social media account, it's not just that he's on Twitter, he's on Instagram, he's on Pinterest, he's on LinkedIn, like what? Prime Minister of India looking for job for what happens next. But the more important point is, if the general citizens of India are on LinkedIn, and I, as the leader, am also on LinkedIn, that has a certain it makes a statement of homophily between myself and the rest of the world. So there's very good use of social media in terms of how it's built up. And so the next we'll move on to polarization. And this is what happens when you let artificial intelligence capture a picture for you. So I'm not going to go into the methodology of what we do, but basically what my team does is we capture social media accounts and we look at who's connected to one account and figure out from their profile text, etc., what that person is likely to be, then do a verification check and then go and pull their tweets, etc. And I'm more than happy to talk about the specifics of how we go about doing this in question and answer. But in a nutshell, what we've done, not just for India, but another set of other countries as well, is created large lists of politicians and influencers in those countries and capture their tweets to see how they talk about various issues over time. Okay, and so the data I will talk about is from a set of about 33,000 Indian politicians. And when I say 33,000, you have to, it goes all the way down to panchayat level and city IT cell level politicians, and about 19 to 20,000 Indian influencers. And when I say influencers, it goes from major celebrities to news to journalists, etc. Okay, so the first thing I will do is I will run you through a bunch of graphs which show you where influencers stand on a political spectrum, as well as where they stand in terms of how much importance they have in terms of their content going out. So, on this graph, the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is the p-score, which is how polarized is an influencer. So if you see a dot which is exactly around the middle, that means that that person neither leans towards BJP nor towards the opposition. And we just do a binary classification. All BJP or NDA is on one side, all opposition is on the other side. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you're Aam Aadmi Party or Congress, you are clubbed into the same category. And we can talk about the methodological problems with that. But in its nutshell, this is fairly intuitive. These are all people who are mainstream celebrities and how polarized they are. So as you can see, the larger the dot, the larger the number of followers that that account has. Okay, and the darker the dot, that means the more retweeted that person gets when they tweet. Okay, so as you go towards the left of the graph, the influencers become more and more polarized towards the BJP. That means the content that they are putting out is getting engaged by BJP politicians or BJP-leaning influencers. Okay, as you go towards the right on the graph, that means the content is getting engaged by people who are on the non-BJP end of the spectrum, the BJP end of the spectrum. Okay, so you can imagine that someone like Shah Rukh Khan is on the non-BJP end of the spectrum, yeah, but he's lower down on the y-axis, which means that he doesn't put out a lot of political content. So the higher up you go on the y-axis, the more political your content is. So as you can see, on the extreme left right corner, it is Vivek Agnihotri. So his content is highly political and highly polarized towards BJP. Okay? On the other end of the spectrum, you have Kunal Kamra, whose content is highly polarized towards non-BJP, and he talks a lot about politics. Okay? Now, exactly in the middle is someone like Anand Mahindra, okay, who has content which gets engaged with both sides, but he's fairly high up on the y-axis, which means he talks a lot. All right, but here's the interesting concept. There is this idea of something called the spiral of silence. It's a political theory from the 1970s by a German philosopher. And the idea is, are there certain concepts that you will not talk about in public? If you're sitting next to somebody on a train, is this a topic you won't touch? And those topics are the topics which become controversial enough in society that you don't want to engage in them. Okay? So this idea of spiral of silence, we apply this to influencers who talk about politics. And what we see is the opposition. So what we basically did is looked at 2021 and 22-23 and how many people were talking about politics and got engaged by opposition politicians in 2021 versus 22-23. Okay? So if you are up on the y-axis over here, it means you talked more about politics in 22-23 versus 2021. Okay? If you are on the right side of the spectrum, that means you were talking anti-BJP. If you were on the left side of the spectrum, you're talking pro-BJP. Okay? So you can see Vivek Agnihotri, again, is the big winner here, is that he talks much more about politics more recently than he did in the past. Okay? And not only is he talking much more about politics, in general, he stays on the left corner, which means that he continues to be more engaged by BJP persons, okay? And then on the right side of the spectrum, there's only one influencer that you see who has gone up. By the way, this is a selective sampling. I'm not going through all the influencers because it would kind of make no sense to have that much on the graph. The most important thing to take away from this graph is that most of the people who are on the non-BJP side have stopped talking about politics. And that's very important, because that says that you learned your lesson. You said something, you saw the consequences, and you shut up after that. Okay, so you can see Salman Khan, Harbhajan Singh, Sonu Sood, Swara Bhaskar, all of them were very active online, talking about various issues and starting to get engaged by politicians on the opposition side. And over time, they start becoming quieter and quieter and quieter. So this is an important shape of things to come. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about contagion. I won't go into the theory of this because I don't have a lot of time. But in a nutshell, there is two ways to think about contagion of information. One of them is to see whether somebody saying something has an impact or whether them being quiet about something in and of itself has an impact. So sometimes, case in point is the Israel-Gaza conflict right now. Politicians in the United States have to address it. If you don't address it, then your lack of addressal is seen as being on one side or the other. So that's basically, in a nutshell, where we're going to go with this. Okay, television anchors. If you look at television anchors, the larger the bubble, again, the more the followers they have, and which side of the spectrum they are on shows you, where they stand politically. And as you can see, there is way more major anchors who are leaning pro-BJP versus pro-opposition. Okay? So you have Sushant Sinha is the most engaged, most polarized, and a very high amount of content, and Rohini Singh is on the other end of the spectrum. And most of these names should make intuitive sense that, yeah, this is where that person stands. What is often does not make sense is because there is a very high degree of content which tends to be pro-government, even those who we think of as generally leaning towards the BJP, the fact that they get some amount of opposition content, Rahul Kanwal being a case in point, seems to be much more leaning towards, or at least like central, or leaning towards opposition than you might think looking at their content. It also has to do with how you are consuming the content and what are the words that the person says that you catch on to versus the whole story of what they're saying. Okay. If you look at the gaps between traditional media, between regional media and national media, again, the graph is pretty explanatory. The Press Information Bureau and Doordarshan channels generally tend to be very pro-government. And if you look at the left side of the spectrum, the international media, now NDTV is still on the other side of the spectrum because we're looking at data from 2020 onwards, right? But Maharashtra is a very interesting anomaly case because there's a lot of engagement by the changes within Shiv Sena, which makes somebody look like they're anti-government, pro-government. So there's stuff going on over there. But the important thing is that there's no clear pattern on regional versus national in terms of the kind of content that gets engaged. So that is not something that we can say something about. However, when you move to digital influencers, what you should take as incredibly stark is the lack of anybody in the middle. Okay? So which means that once you move from, if I was to go back a few slides, when you're looking at anchors, there's some amount of variation, but generally things are polarized. Once you look at popular public figures, there's more, some in the middle, some on both sides, etc. Even if we look at just the news channels, there is some spread. But as soon as you move towards influencers, it starts getting extremely polarized. And this is one of the reasons why the growth of influencers is very dangerous to the quality of democracy and to the nature of polarization, because they are the ones that are most fundamental in putting out the content that divides us most. Now, talking about news, one of the things that's happened, Anand Ranganathan is probably one of the most important accounts on Twitter in India today in terms of the amount of engagement and in terms of the integration of social media with mainstream media, because there are hashtags that one uses on social media which then get integrated into a ticker in a news channel or something like that, or posting of clips of somebody talking on news, then going onto social media. So there really isn't a clear distinction between where social media ends and where mainstream media takes off. So there is breakaway journalists, okay? You've all heard of some people like Punya Prasun Bajpai, Ravish Kumar, Ajit Anjum, who've kind of broken away from channels and started setting up their own social media content. And what we've also seen is a huge battle over political interviewing. This is something, again, that you can attribute back to Narendra Modi and his lack of significant engagement with journalists. But that concept itself has now moved across parties, where more and more politicians don't want to engage with a journalist who can ask them difficult questions, and instead want to engage with a influencer who gives them access to new kinds of markets, political markets, but also can be much more malleable in the kinds of questions that you will ask them, okay? So you've probably heard of Sandesh, but then Lallan Top was the channel which really broke into political interviewing in a very important way. I would say Lallan Top is probably one of the most important social media channels in terms of its content overall right now. And now you also have people who are technical influencers, the technical guruji, which many of you must have heard, and now they are doing interviews with politicians, okay? So this notion of just like a mainstream journalist doing an interview, that's gone. Because that, as we get more polarized, as a politician, you know that there's no use for me to get interviewed by, say, News Laundry if I can map out in my mind what is the consumer base of News Laundry. But if I go to Technical Guruji, then I have a completely different audience that I'm speaking to. Okay? So you see all these channels, some of them like Dost Cast, the beer biceps dude, and then, Do Politics, Capital TV, all of these basically have now started doing politician interviews, not just at the national politician level. This is very important that it goes down to municipal elections, it goes down to MLA candidates who've now started going after influencers. Okay? Influencers also have a pathway into becoming mainstream politicians. So people like Kapil Mishra and Tajinder Bagga, they were politicians, but they were like some, not some major politician, but by becoming very important on social media, that gives them a platform to become a much larger politician. Yeah, you have this Shehzad Poonawala, who was sort of a, I don't know what he was kind of an anchor type of guy. And then now he's a politician, right? So there are many cases like this. Anuma Vidisha is somebody who is a Congress-leaning wing commander. And because there is a much stronger defense veteran group which leans towards the government right now, for the opposition to also have their defense person is important. So all of these influencer types matter for who you're trying to go after. Okay? Especially on the BJP side, there is now a whole list of, for instance, anti-separatism influencers, Kashmiris, who are speaking pro-government. Some of these I really like. There's these white Hindu practitioners who are pro-government. The white pro-India female influencers, including English Behan, who usually has like a Hanuman in her profile. There's Pakistan hating Pakistanis, which are also useful. And then there are the unlikely influencer, right? So there's Savio Rodriguez, who is a very pro-BJP influencer. Again, a very important account in terms of getting things out viral. There is the person I talked about who's a pro-Congress influencer. And so there's and then there's, Muslim influencers who are pro-BJP. So then they present the face of that, well, we are secular, etc. Right? And the last and the most important category for me is the new growth of humor influencers, where somebody who says really aggressive things, but behind the veneer of appearing to be funny. Okay, Abhijit Iyer Mitra has kind of perfected this by saying a lot of snarky things, but also using his identity as part of that. If you look at the humor and parody influencers, Rahul Gandhi, some of you must have heard of it, he's generally anti-BJP and this is a log-scaled graph on the y-axis, extremely important account, but that Rahul Gandhi has become a pro forma, for lack of a better term, for a number of other similar influencers who have come on the pro-government side. Okay, there is another classic trope which was used against the BJP historically, was that all the intellectuals and whatever urban Naxal, etc. crowd belongs to the opposition, and as a result we've seen now a growth of intellectuals or people who are presented as intellectuals coming in as influencers on the pro-government side. Okay, so there is of course this Thinkers Forum. Has anybody heard of this? I guess it's not that influential. But then, you have a bunch of other people. I'm guessing a lot of people have heard of Sanjeev Sanyal, Krishnamurti Subramaniam, Dhruv Jaishankar, etc. And these people are now the new face that you don't just have to turn to an Amartya Sen or a Raghuram Rajan to talk about, to speak in a competent way about the economy in India. And these are alternative influencers. Now, what's important is that if you want to be recognized as a public intellectual on the side of the government, especially if you want to be like on an economic advisory board, having a social media account has become important in that as well. So your economic advisors are now people who are also on social media. Then once the government does something, you can use that to spread that idea. Yeah. Okay. So similarly, academics and influencers, I'm going to just let you folks have the slides instead of going through this in great detail. But it's important that a lot of the people who were previously just trolls, okay, Rajiv Malhotra, just with lack of respect, straight up troll, but now is an author. So you see people who are here who all of them use the term author as part of their profile. In fact, when we looked at hate speech accounts in India, the two most common terms used in people's profile text was engineer and professional. So by saying I'm an engineer, you bring a certain kind of legitimacy to the table. Trust me, I'm an engineer, and therefore, an IIT/IIM or something like that. And therefore, whatever I say has to have some kind of credibility. So there's credibility creation in your profile text itself, which is a starting point of creating your influence behavior. Okay? There's also, these things have led to certain kind of anti-West messaging. You've all probably noticed the way that influencers have been divided over the Israel-Gaza situation, but also that same kind of conversation has been happening over major liberal cities in the United States and some kind of, crime, etc. And a lot of this has undertones of racism towards poor populations of color in liberal cities in the United States. And the same is true for Russia and Israel. So I'm going to wrap up my talk by showing a few things about the differences between the BJP and the Congress influencers. In the BJP, the way of managing influencers is much more cleverly done all the way down to district levels, where a district IT manager or a person, a part of a team, will know who are important in that district in terms of outreach of content, etc. Whereas on the opposition side, most of that is managed centrally through who is known to the overall national head, and then they can reach out to people. So this distribution is a very important part of making sure that especially when you're running elections in the state legislature, having access to influencers who are valuable in that state becomes an important part of how you do, especially the WhatsApp related campaigning in the state itself. I want to end with a few important graphs. The first is that the median polarity by subcategory, you'll see as we go from the right end of the graph to the left end, you'll see that digital influencers as an overall category tend to be most pro-BJP, whereas journalists as a category tend to be most pro-opposition. Okay? And this is also why digital influencers are becoming much more important to the information ecosystem over here. Okay? There's two graphs, again, which I won't go into much detail over here, but the important point I want to say here is that when a message is engaged by a politician, that message gets way more retweeted, liked, on social media than when it is not engaged by a politician. What that means is having political content is useful to the brand of the celebrity. And that becomes even more significant when you look at digital influencers. Okay, what I'm saying here is that digital influencers benefit when a politician engages their content, but unlike a mainstream influencer who can be controlled because they have a life outside, Shah Rukh Khan, you can put his kid in jail and all that, but he can still make a hit movie. The digital influencer is nothing without access to the politician, or that person can be crushed much more easily. So you have the digital influencer benefiting from political content, and you have the politician much more able to control that person versus if they were a cricketer, etc., whatever else comes with that. Okay? And essentially another graph to basically show that the digital influencers who are on the side of the opposition are generally doing much worse over time than the digital influencers who are on the side of the government. Same statistical graph here. I want to end with YouTube and what is happening on YouTube. What I did here is map the various big players on YouTube by millions of viewers and how much content they have that gets engaged here. And in a nutshell, what I'm going to tell you is that probably Aaj Tak and Lallan Top are, like I was saying, very, very important channels in the future of what might happen in the coming election and what kind of content will be engaged. But if you see the green line which goes around over here, the numbers that go with that, each number here is the number of videos that that channel has. So on the extreme left of the spectrum, you see Aaj Tak, which has about 300,000 videos. Okay? You see NDTV has about 150,000 videos on YouTube. Okay? But if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, Ravish Kumar has 200 videos, but 7 million followers. So the point here is that you can be a newsroom, invest in a large number of journalists, get a lot of content going out, but you can be an anchor turned influencer who can have much more impact in terms of the number of people you reach for the amount of investment you put into making each video. Okay, so this says here my time's up. I was going to go on and on about more stuff like this. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is that what we are seeing in this overall ecosystem is that we are moving from celebrities to digital influencers, from journalists to anchors, and from mainstream news to independent sources. And if there's one thing we should be looking out for in the coming election, it is how these influencers will start taking the place of journalists as interlocutors between people and politicians. So I will end here with this guy. I think he's a Norwegian influencer he's Norwegian, right? And for some reason he has a lot of Hanuman videos and stuff like that. So we are really like going global in interesting ways. So thank you. Yeah. So I'm here for questions. Yeah. So.
Hello, sir. So you talked about like influenced, manipulated, and like polarized information around the internet and on web and everywhere. What's the solution for listeners? Like, how do they comprehend and analyze by themselves that it is a fake news or a true news, and maybe a few percentage of people living in urban areas can do that? What about the people living in rural areas? What about like the other people, us, the listeners, as the students who are listening to you, who are able to like analyze, like, yes, it is true and this is false. What about the others? Like, what is the solution? That all the renowned journalists and educationists in this newsroom present here have on this.
Right. So I don't think that I have a solution. I would just give you a roundabout answer which says nothing. So essentially what's going to happen is the more we are aware of this, the more we can watch out for this. The solution kind of depends upon who you are. If you are a politician, I would say the solution is you do the same thing that the other people are doing and muddy the information network so much that nobody can know what is true and what is not. Okay. But if you are a citizen, then really the answer is that you have to just learn, people just have to learn to be much more thoughtful about what information they're engaging and what sources it is coming from. But there isn't an easy solution to what is happening that can't be gamed one way or the other. You can think about authentication of information. But if you see what I'm saying over here, is that mainstream media channels are in real risk of getting eaten up by social media. And the more risk there is for them to get eaten up, you might call them Godi media, whatever it is, but even with that, they're going to get eaten up. So they are going to go more and more in the direction of online channels, which means that they will get more and more polarized. So this is something for citizens to then start looking for where that polarization is coming from and what those words are which indicate that. Do you have one more question? Can I take one more? Yeah, one last question.
Yeah, I want to apologize first because I'm interpreting today, and I'm not like as an interpreter, you're not supposed to be part of the audience or ask questions. And I really wish if there were deaf people in the room, they would be asking this question. Very interesting insight that you've shared. I just want to adapt this to the deaf world. What really happens in the deaf world? It's the same thing. There are influencers who decide which, I mean, the deaf population is around the census says 50 lakh, but it's about 18 million in the country. And they are going by like 5 or 6 deaf influencers who, because there is, like, for the lack of better way of putting it, because the news is not accessible in one, like the left wing news is clearly not accessible at all. And what they only see is the right side of the spectrum. So everybody believes that because there's no other alternative. This is probably the first time we see access of this kind. And what they have done, they've started their own news channels, these influencers. And no matter how much I share the content, because they've never seen it, through the influencers, I, being a hearing person coming from a different, majority community, would never be able to influence them. So I think, I know in the lens can get deeper as we go into the diversity of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You could look at the deaf population, you could look at just about any population, and that's the point I was making about micro-targeting. And for any population that you belong to, you can find some subset of influencers who are holding sway over that population. That could be regional, that could be based on your identity, and so on and so forth, which is why this influencing as a general behavior is so risky to the quality of information that we consume. My time is up, but I'm the only guy I see so far in a safari suit. You can catch me outside and I'll answer your questions. Thanks.